Good morning, Ian. How are you?
Hi, Kerry. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Great to be invited on to talk to your audience and talk to Culture Camp.
Yes, so we're here today for Culture Camp. So, Ian, tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
So, yeah, my name's Ian Dinwiddy. I'm the founder of Inspiring Dads, and I do a lot of work with organisations and with individual men in terms of supporting the parental transition, supporting dads' experiences before they have children, during those early days, during the potential parental leave, and also coming out of that. And sort of from an individual basis, helping men to understand how to be a great dad without sacrificing a great career.
Lovely. So it's definitely about that intersection between work and our family lives that you're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when men become dads for the first, especially for the first time, and certainly what I describe as first year fathers, then there's enormous practical and emotional upheaval that takes place within their own personal experience and engagement with their children, engagement with their partners, and also how they show up at work and what and how becoming a dad maybe changes their perspective or broadens their perspective on what being a great man is, and you know, and some of those challenges that raise their head in terms of how to perform at work and also perform within their relationships and within their family. So quite a broad range of things that all comes to head, and it's particularly challenging. Can be a particularly challenging time for individuals.
Yeah. So if we're thinking about that kind of work dynamic, as a woman, you may have maternity leave, men have paternity leave, but what's the difference, or what's how do people's workplaces support men through this transition?
Yeah, I think there's challenges in terms of the opportunity for men to take extended leave. Statutory leave in this country is 2 weeks statutory pay, and if you're self-employed, you don't get any sort of provision at all. And for a lot of organisations, that's the kind of the bare minimum that's provided for men. And it's much more common that maternity leave is enhanced within organisations, and for very good practical and traditional and kind of societal kind of support around women's experiences and the maternity experience, I think is really, really important. But increasing numbers of organisations are starting to understand that actually supporting dads starts, there are many ways of supporting dads, but it starts with making sure they have the opportunity, they have the time to spend with their partner, with their new child, and regardless of how they become parents as well, whether they're adoption or it's surrogacy or single gender relationships, the whole range of dynamics. But men having the opportunity to take more than those first couple of sort of hurried weeks is a really good starting point to build a more interesting and more balanced sort of culture within the organization, certainly from a gender equality perspective.
Yeah, and there's lots of things that you just don't know how to do when you're a new parent. And if you're spending less time with the child and less time in that family home, then that's going to be harder, isn't it? I wonder, are those the kind of problems that dads come to you with?
So it's interesting in terms of there's interesting kind of dynamics within what I call sort of the fatherhood journey, is
Mm,
that there are quite sort of practical side of things, that couples, I think individuals probably worry about sort of pre-birth. But
mm,
actually, from my perspective, I think the really interesting conversations are actually how are we going to structure our lives, our working lives and our home lives, when baby arrives, 6 months down the line, when maternity leave runs out, are we going to take up the opportunities for shared parental leave? What can we afford to do? And we can never take away that sense of actually a lot of these provisions and a lot of these kind of policies that may be in place. We can have great shared parental leave, but it actually involves transferring leave from a birth mother typically into a father,
mm.
and it's often not well paid, and therefore can individuals, we may have great policies, but can people afford to do it? So it's, yeah, we build up it's a complicated sort of picture, I think, Kerry, but
Mm.
one that is where the organizations, I think, need to kind of start to think about as it starts to become a point of difference. Organizations that enhance sort of paternity leave, or potentially, the holy grail is equalizing taking parental leave. But as
Yeah.
they start to put more things in place, then they start to become a point of difference, both in terms of retention and also for recruitment purposes.
Yeah, great point. And I guess for a woman, there's the recovery period as well, the kind of physical recovery that needs to be taken into account. And actually doing that on your own whilst looking after a newborn can be extremely tough on everybody involved. You're smiling probably from
Yeah.
experience.
Yes. Yes, I had 2 weeks of statutory leave, and my wife Lisa had 6 months of fully paid leave, and our daughter
Uh-huh.
Freya, first time around, she's 13 now, but she had acid reflux, and so that was
Oh, yeah.
really, really challenging. And that sense of being away from the family home, I very
Mm,
much had the fear. I used to call in at lunchtime, and it was that kind of fear of, okay, how's the day been going? How's
yeah.
Freya? And I'd have this very nervous conversation, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Entirely, and what Lisa said, and how she said it in many ways, was instrumental in how the rest of my day would go. So men, even if they're turning up at work and they haven't taken leave, actually supporting men through those emotional, certainly those emotional side of becoming a father, first time, second time, third time, doesn't really matter. Each time is almost like a reset.
Yeah.
Having time really matters, but also having support and having the awareness that actually there are lots of other men in your situations who are going through the same things. So connecting dads together, to always encourage organizations to sort of try and set up employee resource groups that are focused around the fatherhood experience in particular. They will start small because men will go like, oh, I don't know whether I want to come and talk about these things, but actually
Yeah.
they'll get bigger and bigger, and they'll generate their own momentum, and they're really important parts of processing some of the challenges, because sometimes, best will in the world, we can't do everything individually.
Mm,
We can't do everything, but men frequently are suffering in silence to some degree,
mm,
certainly in those early months. And there's a lot of change in those first 6 months to a year or so.
yeah. And just that little bit that you mentioned there about you start small because men are like, oh, I don't know if I want to join that. What's that? What's that part of it, do you think? What's that reluctance?
I think I wouldn't say hardwired. I think it's very hard to know the difference between sort of things that are innate sort of
Sure.
kind of characteristics, sort of masculine human characteristics,
Mhm.
versus sort of expectations, societal assumptions. So I
Sure.
think men from an early age are kind of we promote solving things on our own,
Mm,
working out the answers. You'll find that, if you look at Google searches, for instance, men will ask quite precise questions to get quite precise answers to solve problems. And so there's a sense that actually solving problems on my own is what being a man is about. In some versions of the narrative are certainly around that. But actually, talking to other men and sharing it and start and kind of life's a bit tough, isn't it, sort of thing. It's a conversation that men aren't often having. I
mm,
sometimes talk about silos, that male kind of social groups are often siloed. So I'll have school friends, and I'll have
mhm,
maybe hockey friends and work, ex-work colleagues, and often, or maybe people will have friends that they go and go to the football with, and they'll tend to talk about relatively narrow topics within those areas, and they won't cross over. And actually broadening this conversation, kind of making it okay to talk, good to talk to each other, good to kind of that sense that we're all in it together. And actually, if one person's feeling depressed about circumstances, or there are challenges that they can't seem to get out of their head, just getting in a group, and even small, it's group therapy, ultimately group talking, and it's really powerful when you do get dads together in that kind of environment to make it okay to have conversations. Men will have those conversations if you set it
mm.
up and frame it in the right way.
Yeah. And through these conversations that we've been having at Culture Camp, this idea of community keeps coming out. How do we create community in our workplaces? And what are the benefits around that? But I wonder about what are some specific challenges around developing that kind of support in your organization around men in particular?
So I think there's sort of multi levels of what we could describe as support. Well, one is often the first and foremost for organizations is often about testing the assumptions that we have kind of as a business. And often the assumption is that men aren't necessarily interested in taking leave because we've got this shared parental leave and they're not taking it. So therefore they're not interested. Actually, it's often to do with, it's that sense of opting into the leave. It's about taking leave from probably from a female partner, and do they want to give up leave? It's maybe not paid well enough to be able to compensate within the relationship. It doesn't make sense to do it. So breaking that assumption that men actually don't want to engage is really, really important. But even if you've got great policies, sometimes a conversation can be stopped quite early by a line manager who believes that, for whatever reason, either believes an individual is too important to take leave, even if it's available, or that he doesn't believe that he or she may not believe that men should take leave anyway, because their responsibility is to earn for their family, and sometimes, bound up in concepts of what being a good man is, what, being a good woman is, what parenting, how do we kind of measure these things? Quite challenging. So I think it's often about culture and the assumptions. It's about, are we actually kind of measuring the right things? Is there a demand there? And it's almost certainly there is a demand there. If you've got men who are young dads, they're almost certainly balancing work and fatherhood. They almost certainly want to be more involved. Unless you've got highly flexible organizations, they almost certainly are feeling some kind of tension between, if we look at it in quite a binary nature, between breadwinning and caring. It's much more complicated than that. But there will be tension there. And it's about not just assuming that it isn't there, because it absolutely will be, and putting in little things and talking directly to men, making it feel about dads. There's a lot of employee resource groups which tend to start off as parents and carers, and actually parents and carers sometimes is shorthand for mothers, and that's who tends to go to those things. Getting those first adopters. Sometimes for organizations, it's about identifying senior men who are involved in active and involved kind of hands-on parenting, and almost putting them on a pedestal and say, it's okay, there's a man who's doing it, he's a senior position, and then we can talk about these things. Start to have those conversations, because you'll find actually there's a whole, potentially a whole sort of untapped desire to talk about these and to work out how to balance these different aspects of our lives.
And it's such a fine line, isn't it? So I'm thinking about, my sister's had a baby recently, and we went to rhyme time at a library,
Cool.
and there was one dad there, and there was quite a lot of oh, isn't he good? Isn't he good for looking after his child? Or, are you enjoying looking after your baby for the day, kind of thing, which is, on lots of levels really annoying.
Yeah.
And if we're so there's part of me that's thinks about, if we're creating a space in work to sort of give men that platform, or give fathers that platform to be together and create that kind of community, I feel that we've got to make sure that we also have those spaces for women in our organization. I think it's, if we're talking about equality, it needs to be equality of experience, and at the moment that's so outweighed, isn't it? What do you think about that?
I think it's two sides of the same coin to the equality piece, is that until it's normal for men to be in caring responsibilities, it's hard for it to be normal for women to be in senior leadership roles. It needs to be, we need to understand that they work hand in hand. And for every, rhyme and time and those kind of things, I used to go to Monkey Music. Brilliant. I absolutely love it. I was the only dad. I mean, I was stay-at-home dad first time round. I did 9 months with Freya on my own kind of thing, Monday to Friday, and that was 13 years ago. 12 years ago. 13, I guess. Yeah, it must have been 13. Long time ago. Too long ago. I had a lot less grey hair. Whether the two are related, probably not as much.
My hair's red because actually it's grey underneath, and I also have a 13-year-old.
That's something maybe I should go for. But I was the only dad, and it's that flip side of things, and you see that in the flip side. I had a conversation a few years ago with someone who used to work with my wife, and she was around about 30 years old, didn't have children, didn't necessarily have children on a horizon necessarily, but she said to me, when I first met Lisa's my wife, she said, I didn't think she was had children because I didn't think a mum could do this job. She said, I realized as a woman how damaging that was to my prospects, to her prospects, to everyone's prospects. And it's that breaking those assumptions that rhyme and time is only for mums and toddler groups. We need to kind of, ideally, we'd call them parenting groups. I think we need to recognize the experience of motherhood, the challenges in terms of the motherhood penalty, something that Pregnant and Screwed talk about a lot in terms of, I think it's 58,000 women a year leave the workplace as a result of pregnancy. And we need to understand those dynamics, but we also need to understand that there's a desire for men to be more heavily involved. And in organizations where there's equalized parental leave, it's well paid, equalized parental leave, men take it up in almost as many numbers as women when it's built into the culture, and it's paid, and it's well paid, so that families can afford to do it. Because actually, society is changing. My wife, gender pay gap in our family is enormously in my wife's favor, and was when we met as well. But more and more, and what we're seeing, certainly research I saw recently from America, 30% of married couples, the woman earns more than the man. So we're starting to see that dynamic. And unless we see men as carers as much as breadwinners, it's much harder for women to sort of take on those opportunities in the workplace if we're constrained by what we think men can do when they're at home and what those opportunities look like as well.
And the whole concept of a breadwinner is a ridiculous concept anyway, because if you're a family unit, there's what you're contributing and then what you're benefiting from. And that's what we need to equalize, I think, not just who's bringing in money or resources. Like you say, it's more complex than that.
It's much more, and it's one of those things where in some ways, kind of some of the cultural assumptions we have around parenthood is stuck 30, 40, 50 years ago. Actually, people's lives are much more complicated. It's much more likely for couples to be in dual income relationships than it is to be a sole breadwinning model. That's much more common now. And there's a little bit of a lag, certainly from government legislation perspective, and then slowly through to organizations. There's a lag between people's lived experiences of parenting and the necessity of dual income relationships. That's, sometimes it's not a choice, it's a necessity in many cases. That lags a little bit behind how we see things. A bit of a disjoint between how we see competent or incompetent dads, and isn't it nice he's taking giving mum a break. Actually, when we unpick that, that's quite a problematic thought to have in terms of certainly gender equality and female progression at work and opportunities from that perspective.
Well, thank you, Ian. Thought-provoking, I think, and a perspective we don't often hear, and we need to hear more of. So thank you. I'd love to share how we can find you with the audience. So what's the best place to find you?
So two key places. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So there are actually two Ian Dinwiddys on LinkedIn, but one of them is a Scottish player, and he's an engineer in Telford. I don't think we're actually related, not very closely anyway. I should probably find out. He's not him. I look like this, and it's Inspiring Dads. So my business is Inspiring Dads, and you can find it at inspiringdads.co.uk. But yes, LinkedIn is a place where I do most of my social media work.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Ian. It's been lovely talking to you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carrie. Thank you for having me on.